I'm Emily Ghosh,
I'm Brooklin Rayne.
and we are the co-creators of Unity Live and Open to Transparency, which is dedicated to unity consciousness, heart expansion, and the assisting of ascension of all beings. And we are so grateful to be joined by Rebecca Campbell today. She really needs no introduction, but she is a poet, an author, an artist, a mystic, a mom. She is the best-selling author of numerous books and oracle decks that have been translated into 18 languages. And all of her creations are dedicated to helping people live a soul-led life, which we'll be exploring today. And so just Rebecca, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, really happy to be here with you both and everyone listening.
Yeah, so we would love to open this beautiful container of light with any sharing that you feel would be helpful in allowing some people to kind of have an understanding of your journey and what's led you to this now moment.
Um, well, I feel like I always had this yearning for what I call the soul, but also the sacred and also the mystery. I think as a young girl, I didn't really know what I was yearning for, but I knew it was something. Um, and yeah, in my teens and then 20s, it felt like a whole world opened up as I experienced my first awakening. And then I began realizing that the awakening process never ends. It's just different every time. Yeah, and so I did go into a career as a creative director, where I worked in corporate world and all of that. But I was also a writer there as well, so I definitely got some really great skills in knowing how to work with visuals and artists and designers and working on my craft as a writer as well. But it was really in my late 20s and 30s where I just knew that I had that sinking feeling, and I hated admitting it, that everything that I'd spent so long and hard building was actually not the path that I was being called to continue to walk. And that was a really big deal for me because I'd always had this knowing that creating and my career was part of why I came here. Like I really wanted to put positive messages out there, but also soulful messages out there. And yeah, at the time it felt like, oh my gosh, like, oh, do I really have to start again? And of course, looking back, I now know that nothing's ever wasted. And when I look back, I've been fascinated and a student of the great mysteries since before I was a creative. And I actually think the two are very interlocked, intuition and creativity. So yeah, so in my 30s, I finally, it was late 20s actually, I finally made the leap in beginning to, well, I finally surrendered to the call of creating and sharing about the great mysteries and the journey of the soul and intuition. And yeah, little by little, by baby step, eventually I started writing books and creating oracle decks and teaching workshops and all of those things.
Yeah, fantastic. I know personally, I love and have the light is the new black. I feel like I had an opportunity to really get to know a little bit more about your journey through that, and it's such a portal of light. And I remember when I first received it, and I thought, okay, is this something that I'm going to be guided to read from front to back? Or, how is this asking for me to interact with it? And I received, no, hold it, bring it in, and participate with it as you would an oracle deck. and allow for it to, to bring forth a message. So there was a period of time, even in private session work, where I was so excited. I would come in and I would download whatever was wanting to come through for the person, and then I would pick up light is the new black, right? Am I saying it? I always mix up and change around words. And it was so spot on. Like every single time, like the message, the download that had come through was like completely succinct with your portal of light. And so many people have enjoyed and played in it in that way. And yeah, there's just so much wisdom. You're such an oracle of beauty and tenderness and love and wisdom. And I can't wait to get into more of the sharing of, what right now in this now moment and all of that is taking place. What are you feeling is like the biggest message and sort of catalyst in this particular moment of the journey?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the word wisdom, and I've been getting quite a lot lately of how, and perhaps it's going to be for our entire lives, that there I'm feeling like something I'm being called to do is preserve wisdom, because so much wisdom has been lost through the ages. And um, I think that some of us have had wisdom passed down through our ancestral line, but most of us have not. And we're navigating a time where it's like, okay, how do we reach back to the ancients that did not forget? How do we do that? And how I've been called to do it myself, and I didn't think this was going to be part of my teachings, but it's just evolving into it is. It's through connecting to nature is one way. So the plants, the water, the stones, the trees, yeah. And I think that when we do connect to the land, like stones have been here so much longer than we have. They hold the test of time. And yeah, and the rose, for example, which is my new oracle, it is a secret symbol of the feminine, of goddesses of old, like so many different goddesses from so many different traditions as well. And so, yeah, I'm personally being called deeper and deeper into the mysteries and deeper into seeing the sacred that's woven through everything. So the sacred in nature, because I really feel that I think particularly in the West, those of us who've had our spiritual awakenings and all of that, and maybe were raised in a society or a culture that the sacred wasn't really present. There's like this God as a man in the sky, maybe, but the sacred wasn't in the everyday, or the sacred has always been there, but we haven't been taught to see it. And so what I've observed in myself and with others as well is that, like, when we awaken at first, often it feels like this whole new world has opened up and it's exciting, and in a way it has. I mean, it had always been there, but we've woken up to it. But I noticed as well that as that happened, it also felt like we were disconnected a little bit more from the world that we were in. And so it was almost like there's these two worlds now, which brings with it complications as well. And I think that we have compartmentalized spirituality, for example, and it's great we're doing our spiritual practice, our daily practice and all of that. But I even noticed in myself a couple of years ago, I'd be like, okay, cool, I'm going to do my practice now. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to go get grounded now, as if they were two separate things, And I see this over and over again with too many of us, where when we're opened up to a whole new way of seeing the world, seeing ourselves and all of that. And we're meant to be constantly that, because it's, the awakening process never ends. But then there is this severing that happens from the rest. And so it's just what I've been really inquiring into lately is, like, how can we properly weave the sacred back in so it's within everything, because it is already. And Yeah, that's what I've been inquiring into.
Yeah, I love that. It's so, I love that you bring that through because recently, more and more I feel like that wisdom of, life becoming a meditation, right? Which I feel like is another way of, kind of bringing that same cohesiveness, right? It's like, not necessarily separating into a practice of meditation over here, and then like you're saying, like, okay, we're moms and, let's just, it's like, truly bringing it all into, living, breathing, walking, meditation of cohesiveness and unity. So, and the fact that you bring in the nature elements, even as you're speaking, it's so clear that you're such a vast portal of light because as you're speaking and you're sharing, like I'm feeling the consciousness of water coming through. I'm feeling the consciousness of the stones and the crystals and, and the earth coming through. It's like, singing and sharing and like almost saying like, yeah, pick me up, feel into me, connect with me, receive my wisdom. And certainly all of those um, consciousness to your knowing, hold everything that has taken place here. Because as one rock may, turn into dust, they work as a one collective, right? So the message is never lost in that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing about weaving it back into our everyday life. I often think about school and our education system and what if we learned, breath work? What if we learned about, how interrelated we all are? I mean, there's so many different things that we could be studying. And to be honest, there's, so little that I have retained from, my educational
That's a blessing.
yeah. But I want to go back to something that you shared in the very beginning, which is, talking about your journey in advertising and then just feeling this discomfort. And I think that is such a rich distinction to point out because sometimes we can look at that discomfort as, a negative thing, but in truth, it's such a blessing because it really gets us back in touch with our soul.
Mm. Yeah, I think, it makes me think of the concept of impermanence, which is really just like life on earth and nature, like we're ever changing beings living in an ever changing world. Everything here is changing constantly. And that's the most normal thing in the world. Um, and I think that discomfort is like a part of the growth phase. We're not, I know some people change more than others. Like some of our paths are more, ups and downs and curves and bends than others. Like, so it's not like we all need to change at the same rate or whatever, but we're not here to be the same. And I think that just like the seasons when the leaves are wanting to fall in autumn, or you guys would say fall. um, and then like the cloak of the darkness of winter, like nature's teaching us this over and over again, but in our society it's just been so focused on like being in the bloom all year round, the bud and the bloom, the bud and the bloom, particularly as women. And yeah, and also kind of like almost ignoring the fact that death happens. Like I know we grieve, we have funerals and all of that, but death is the most normal thing in the world. Like birth and death are the things that we all have in common. And I remember when I was a teenager, and I know a lot of people thought I was a bit weird because like I was dyslexic, so I did not, or I am, so I didn't really read books that much unless I had to, or unless I like really wanted to know about it. And yeah, when I was in my early teens, I started just being fascinated by death and like what happens when we die? Like what is that part of us that is here before we take our breath, and then what happens after that? Like, oh my God, like why isn't everyone just wanting to know. I just couldn't understand. I still can't. And I know it's like a mystery and we can't possibly grapple it. So maybe that's it, and maybe it's because it's the unknown. But yeah, I think our aversion from um, death and also birth in many ways, the pain that is is not everyone's path, but I'm talking metaphoric as well as physical. um, the extremes of life, which are both birth and death, and I think that says a lot about why it's so hard for us to be in that discomfort when things are changing, like seeing it like a bad thing, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think there's just been so many things that have been interwoven into this matrices to create resistance to change, to fear it, right? To fear it, and then when it happens, to trigger us into all of these projections of, the what's going to happen, or and instead of just hunkering down into the glory of it and the beauty of it and the present moment, and just to open it and unwrap it like a present, when you're allowing yourself to have that surprise of the unknown, the surrender. And I love that you brought in, as you were kind of exploring and sharing and bringing us all into the journey of how you transitioned, into that deeper sort of connection with what wanted to come through in your 30s. It's the surrender, right? It's the final sort of like, okay, yeah,
Yeah, and then that never ends. I was talking to
yeah.
my friend the other day, and her mother hadn't been well and was having very serious surgery, and so they were all waiting like outside because of COVID of the hospital. And she was talking to me about this that in between moment where it's like, and for her it was very drawn out because it was like hours, almost like a day of surgery. Um, and she's like, I realized how excruciating that not knowing bit is. Like, if I had the information, I would have dealt with it, but it was more painful being in the unknown than A or B, even if A or B was like good and bad, like outcomes. And yeah, I thought the way she described that is just so true. And I also want to say that we're obviously talking metaphorically and symbolically and mystically and all of that. I just want to say, like, I hate that in between, and I hate that discomfort, and I want to avoid it as much as I can, even though I know it.
Yeah, it is really uncomfortable. And I feel like so much of that could be said metaphorically, but also, in a really felt sense, in, on all levels of what's coming through right now in way of energy, and what's coming through as, this great waves of plasma light and the catalysts for that rebirth, for that change, for, and we're in like the grandest and most, what feels like the most constant interface with greater and greater and greater surrender, to get comfortable within the uncomfortable, right? And like find that space, and sometimes it feels a lot more fluid and easier than others, right? So yeah, there's I feel like such a massive expansion and contraction happening right now.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah, and I think the medicine of the rose is so potent for these transformational times. And I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective, your journey. You shared started in 2010 with the rose, but I'd love to know more about that and some of the symbolism that the rose holds for us right now.
Yeah, sure. So my journey with the rose was like, when I look back, it's really powerful, but at the time it just felt very subtle. Like it was just like following a very subtle thread. Um, and so it began where I knew I was going through a very difficult time of that in discomfort, deep grief, through like actual things that had happened, and also knowing deep within, like in the center of my heart, I could almost taste that, like, no, this is the cracking open, like this is where, yeah, and to go into it rather than avoid it. And I was in a point in my life, like I didn't have kids or anything like that, so I was in a point in my life where I could dedicate myself to my healing and all of that. um, and so I began to discover how much beauty is important to me, and it's a gateway for my soul to, and I think it's a gateway for everyone's soul. But in particular, I definitely know that beauty is imperative compared to, the average person. And so it's really when I began doing altar work. I bought myself roses or flowers to start with, and then roses. And then I also started getting peonies as well. A peony looks like a rose, but it's not a rose technically. And yeah, and so I started filling my house with, I got 6 roses every week. It was like my extravagant ritual. And I'd never bought myself flowers prior to that. I'd been disappointed that I wasn't given them. But so it was a big practice for me, like in self-love, and yeah. And so I began creating altars around the house. I'd do like single roses in every room, like it was a studio flat, but every corner. And then I really noticed how that beauty, I could feel my soul wanting to be here more, versus like the head and the grief and all of that, which were all present still. And then I began really working more with flowers, like the rose oil on my chest, front and back, on my throat and solar plexus, so like an anointing practice. And I began drinking rose tea, but like not as deeply as I do now. Like I wasn't doing it meditatively. I was just kind of exploring it. And but then I found Regent's Park Rose Garden, which is a beautiful park in London, which has like thousands and thousands and thousands of roses. Like it is incredible. And they're a type of rose called a David Austin rose, which is an English breeder, who has passed. But actually, he was a poet as well, I found out last year. And he's got a book called The Breathing Rose, which is a poetry book. But yeah, and so I began, as part of my daily practice, going to the rose garden, like walking and then meditating in the morning. And it was then that I began, I now know what I was doing, but I was just kind of following something. I didn't know it had a name, or no one had introduced me to it before, where I'd connect with really the spirit or the soul of the plant. And I began to hear whispers, and then kind of like speak to the flowers and ask them questions. And I wasn't quite sure, like as a creative, I was like, oh, the rose is my muse. And, I just kind of went with it. And I knew I'd received a vision way back when in my teens of like writing books and speaking on stages, workshops, all of that, but like had no idea what I'd be talking, like, what is that about? But little by little, by showing up every day, I started writing, and I started an Instagram account, a blog. I'm still working full time, but I'm showing up every day, and just, even if I just had 10 minutes, I'd do that. Like it didn't need to be an hour or anything. It's just like, no matter what, the discipline of writing. And actually, as a creative who worked to deadlines, I knew that the tighter the deadline, the more likely you're going to get it done. So I started using that kind of like discipline of the mind to help me with that and focus me with it. I've since found that practice that I have done for, gosh, I mean, I did it even before then, but with discipline since, so it's like 12 years now, pretty much every day. There's a almost lost Scottish word called kything, and that's what I was doing. And my ancestry is Scottish, and I'm sure this practice exists in all different ancient traditions, earth-based traditions. But yeah, and so as I'm preparing for the mystery school, I'm like, what should I call this thing that I do? And I've been researching, and I found this, and I think this is like the whole thing about when we reconnect with the earth, with the different elements. Um, we in ourselves can remember these lost ancient traditions of our ancestry, sometimes without even knowing that we have. And so, yeah, so that has been like the rose journey for me. I mean, I write about it in the guidebook. There's many more stories. Like the house I live in Glastonbury now is called the Old Rose Cottage, and
Mm, perfect.
yeah, that's a whole nother thing. And I brought back the rose garden, but I didn't know there was a rose garden before. So all the old neighbors were like, "You're bringing back the rose cottage." It's not called the rose cottage, wasn't when we bought it. So yeah, there's more stories there, but I won't spend the whole podcast talking about rose stories.
Love
um,
that. We wouldn't mind if you did.
There's something that you shared when you were walking in the rose garden, and I just got goosebumps when you shared that. And it was about like you didn't know fully what you were doing, you just had this inner sense of it. And I think
mm,
that's so profound because oftentimes it's when we connect with our imagination and our curiosity and allow ourselves just to play and just to feel into that. I feel like
mm,
that is the birth point of so much creativity and connecting with our intuition.
Yeah.
so true.
And two, again, it's just like, as you're speaking, the visuals are, it's like visual poetry that's coming through. And like I'm seeing you there and I'm seeing you connecting, and it's really reminding me of like the book The Secret Garden. And I remember when I was a child, like that was like the cool, like similarly, I didn't read a lot because I had some processing issues. And so, but that I remember reading that book and like really, and just like the whole mystery of, connecting in nature and going outside and finding yourself and like, and rediscovering the connection with the earth. It's just so beautiful. And I have many of your decks, and really, I mean, all from, start to finish, there's so much beauty. There's visual beauty in it. There's heartfelt beauty. There's so many layers of the beauty. And I have to say, they're all so unique and profound in their own way. And this rose deck, I just got the chill. Like I feel like even just connecting to the energy is so profound. There's a whole experience that takes place, when you sit down and you start connecting, and everybody connects in different ways. But I just felt like this instant drop in of like a massive collective of just like divine mother tenderness, but also like that wisdom, right? That deep wisdom. And I think one of the first um, cards that I pulled was talking about the winter and talking about the season and talking about the importance of that. And it was like this whole experience unfolding. Yeah, they're just such, each and every card, it feels like such a massive portal of wisdom and beauty. So I can't thank you enough for all that you bring in.
Yeah, and somebody is asking about your process of creating. Stephen is asking about when you're creating an oracle deck, what is your process? Do you channel the images and what the cards say, or what does that look like?
So, yeah, so I think to start with, I I have a vision of what the deck is going to hold energetically and then like aesthetically be. And so I'll always do it'll always come from like an inner invitation, like as in like I'll know, like I won't be like, ooh, let me think of an idea. It'll always emerge. I'm a projector on the human design, so I have to wait for the invitation, and the invitation's often within. um, and then I'll do a mood board for the entire deck, and I'll do like a color palette as well. And then I'll reach out to different artists, and like we'll just do like a couple of tests to just like see how we work together, and then also like like with the rose, I was really, really wanting to um, make it really earthed, so very, because it like was in nature, right? I mean, everything is nature, but um, as in really earthed, but lit from within as well. And yeah, so that was like, oh, how do we do that? And, like putting reference together, we could kind of find it, but it's like a bit of this and a bit of this. And so, yeah, working with an artist with it, I really wanted the depths in this. I wanted the fertile void. I wanted the darkness of the soil. But, it's like when you're in the arms of the Great Mother in the dark night, actually we can feel really alone, but we can also feel really held in that. It's like being in the womb. So yeah, for that deck, that was really important, the ability to like bring that in. And so yeah, and with this deck, Katie, I was looking for artists for, gosh, I'd say at least 6 months, and met some incredible people along the way. And it wasn't quite right, but everyone was amazing in like how they showed up. It was all part of the process. And then yeah, Katie and I were connected, and the timing was just perfect. And yeah, we she works really energetically as well. And so for each card, I'd have the titles of everything and the sublines of everything. And then I do a mood board for each card and a video brief of like, this is what I'm seeing for this card. And maybe I've got a couple of images of like, it's a bit of this, but then I would like this in it. And yeah. And then
Wow.
there were a couple of times where, Katie is she's open to very alternate ways of working. And so she works with sound as well. And so I would chant sometimes, trying to like hold yeah. So,
This
yeah.
is so fascinating. I love hearing about your process. I mean, it's such a elaborate process, and so much is poured into these works of
Mm,
art. I mean, it's
yeah.
and yeah, it's just
I don't
incredible.
think it's everyone's process, but I'm lucky to have worked with artists who are, like open to going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until it's like, oh, we got it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I feel like even in the sharing of the process, it brings everybody, an invitation to have fun, right? Because it seems like I'm sure there were points of, frustration along the way here and there, but it feels like overall it was, an experience that brought forth some joy and allowed you to really kind of create your own dance through it. So,
Totally, totally. And yeah, and I do find that each deck has its own journey, or anything that you create, like you're really working with the energy like in all spectrums of it. And so yeah, the rose is yeah, like, a symbol of love and beauty and healing. But it's also like, it's got the thorn. It's a symbol of the great mother. The great mother, like, is the dark mother, as well as the kind of like, I don't know, compassionate mother. And the dark mother is the fertile void. She holds you in the womb, and she kind of pushes you when you're ready to kind of leave the nest, so it's all of that. And yeah, Katie and I definitely experienced all of that last year while we were working on it.
yeah, I love that. And it's so symbolic of being a mother as well.
Mm,
Because we always want to, nourish and nurture and coddle. And then, when we realize that, too much of that leads to, complacency and procrastination and, and the void of, expressing full potential, then we have to
mm-hmm.
be like the mama bear and be like, okay, yeah, let's get back on the path here, cubs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so beautiful. So, can you tell us a little bit more about, how can people, obviously there's such an abundance of beauty and wisdom expressed through the many books that you've brought forth and the Oracle decks. And I know you mentioned workshops. Is that something that you're still, doing, or how can people work with you, more intimately, or is that
Mhm.
possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm actually doing a workshop on the mysteries of the rose in June. It's an online one, and like there'll be a replay and all of that. So you can find that on my events page. Um, and yeah, also through my membership, that's where I teach mainly. That's like currently the only way to work with me, besides the one-off events. And so, yeah, that's all about like deepening your spiritual practice and just, yeah, being in a community. We do sacred circles and all of that.
Yeah, beautiful.
Amazing. I want to go back to something that you said. You shared that you're a projector.
Mm.
Hmm.
And, I'm curious, my understanding of projector is like a little bit more introverted. Um, and I'm curious about that for you because you are such a public figure. I just recently attended your Rose Oracle celebration party, and there was thousands of people,
I
that
don't.
came together around the world. It was such a beautiful celebration. So, um, yeah, just curious for you how you balance, you know,
Mm.
balance that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like um holding sacred spaces I enjoy doing, and they don't always give me energy, but I feel alive when I do them. Like I know I'm meant to be doing them. I hate being in big groups of people though. So yeah. And yeah, like, it was kind of like last night I hosted a sacred circle for it was like the monthly circle for my membership, and I finished at 8 o'clock at night, and I'm like, I can't sleep until like 1 a.m. then. Like I struggle to switch off. And yeah, and I don't really enjoy, I mean, I get all the privileges that I have as, having a platform, and I so appreciate that I'm able to do the work that I know I'm being called to do. Like, so I deeply appreciate that. And I don't really like being like well known, like the personality. Like I think there's the soul, and then there's the person. And yeah, I really struggle with it. I struggle with social media. I like, and but I love that I can create as I want to. And so I think running this time that we're in, as and if we're mystics, but where we have these platforms of a spiritual business that help us, and spiritual and business, and we're kind of weaving the two together, and one's not good or one's not bad, but it's like they haven't really gone together before in the way that they do now. And I think it's a challenge. And I think social media and being able to energetically be reached, and the other way, like touch lots of people, is incredible. And it's also just like, I think we don't understand it as well. Like I wonder the effects of it, and I wonder, you can do all different energy work, but I often wonder, like, gosh, what is that doing? Like, the like lots of being connected with lots of people, and we know how we feel when we're scrolling ourselves, and so yeah, I'm not sure about it all, but it's also just what is. So,
Yeah, it's helpful to hear you share,
or
about your
what about you both?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, I love that you went there and that you share it because, yeah, there are all, we're these multi-dimensional, multiversal beings, and there are all these different facets. And, I know like on, my journey of this now time, it's a constant commanding in of the embodiment of the oversoul. But commanding in the embodiment of the oversoul presents its own, amazing sort of threads and unique twists and turns. But the personality is still there and it will always be, part of this, this human suit of this experience. So, navigating through to your point of like, okay, knowing that your path of service, not everybody's, but, having a knowing of what your deep calling is, which in this case is, to be in the greatest service to all being seen and unseen. And then moving through the vehicles that are currently available to try to be in the flow of that, you know, to try to show up and to be in the flow of that in the greatest way, it is uncomfortable. There's such a sort of like this weird sort of energy of you know, social media platforms and sort of the AI aspect of it and stuff. Yet, you know, at the same time, it's one of the most present vehicles for all of us to be able to connect. So it's just, yeah, there's just so many layers to it. Sometimes you just want to stay in your pajamas all day and and hang out and just, you know, try to imagine or create a quantum system, you know, that would be just as effective. But to your point, you don't necessarily have to, you know, go on there and dabble in it. And I think that, you know, moving through all the different stigma of, you know, of creating a path of, you know, a greater presence of spirituality through a business model, right? There's so much like religious dogma and all these things that have traditionally kind of kept us in this place of like, okay, you know, sort of the human enslavement, imprisonment, self-sacrificing aspects of it, where, you know, to be in the greatest flow of our service now, it's like, you know, we want to navigate so that we can do it. And this is still the infrastructure that's in place for, you know, to be in the kind of in this place of reaching as many people. But you're like moving through all these uncomfortable stigmas, and people have, you know, even if they're not even consciously aware of it, they have judgment around it. And it's so, I mean, it's just, I'd say the most advanced video game, you know, ever. So yeah, I find that that's one of those things that just provides so many opportunities to see, okay, what's still inside of me? What's still operating? Where am I still playing into any of those belief systems and things? And where can, you know, can I become a greater embodiment of freedom and sovereignty? And so, and create that and try to express that through, you know, through my own business model, if you will, so as to try to come into opening and creating, you know, as hopefully, or planting seeds, if all of us, you know, are kind of doing that in our own way, to, you know, open ourselves up to different vehicles and platforms that will allow for us to feel like a little bit more in resonance with what's out there.
Yeah, totally. I think that, you know, to your sharing, both of your sharings, you know, still this sort of process of weaving business and spirituality, it's still evolving and unfolding, you know, and, you know, you can still see like that there's elements of like, you know, hierarchies or things like this that are, you know, starting to slowly, you know, wash away. And I think the medicine of the rose actually is such a beautiful gift during this time for so many different reasons. But one that really is dropping in is around, you know, allowing us to connect with our heart center and really, you know, open up that space. And I think that, you know, is so important in anything and everything that we're, you know, doing during this time. And so
yeah, I would say too, as I'm kind of feeling into it more, because I love it, because I feel like there's so many different layers to you know, this exploration we're having right now. And you know, I have to say, from my own recalls of previous timelines, you know, and being, you know, in the flow of being, I guess, what would be considered a mystic and a medicine person, etc. You know, we always got very comfortable being in caves and like kind of underground and under the scenes, you know, because it wasn't, you know, safe during those times to come out of the spiritual closet. And, you know, because of the way that things were, you know, you get taken out, you know, and I can recall many timelines where that actually took place. So now to come into this, you know, incarnate into this time, and it's like getting completely naked and, you know, completely coming out of the closet. It's like,
think it gets safe and then be like, oh, no, it's not.
yeah, you start to realize, you're like, oh, yeah. And then, you know, you go to turn back around and your higher self's like, get on out there, girl. Oh, no. You're moving, you keep moving out of the closet. Yeah. So I feel like, you know, there's so many things that are systems and imprints and things that are are being transmuted through these, platforms of engagement, even though it's uncomfortable.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. So do we have some questions that have come through that we want to?
Yeah. Well, I would love, just in that sharing around, really dropping into our hearts and opening up during this time. I'd love to just hear if you have any sort of final words for us or sharing around that, or navigating these transformational times that we're in.
Mm. Well, I feel like we're all in something together for sure, and we're all having our own unique experiences within that. Um, I just keep getting that nature's just teaching us how to be human and navigate these times, and has been forever. And the more we can kind of be present in that and like call our soul here to be here, and that doesn't mean that we have to necessarily get busy and do. It might be just like heal something, or just stay in something, have uncomfortable conversations in order to reach that compassionate place. There's so many different ways for us to do the work at the moment. And I think that particularly if you're called to share things, or support people, or be part of the healing and all of that, to recognize that like your joy is part of it as well, and that we don't have to be on the front lines all the time. Taking time to like, there is plenty of waves coming in, and you're not the only one on the particular wave. Like, we're all riding the waves together. And I've seen it in myself, where it's just like, we need to release ourselves from that patriarchal programming of like, we have to be always on and always in bloom, and be like, okay, cool. Oh, I'm being called forth now. I'm going to do it now. And then if you're not, like, rest, take the time to rest, take the time to replenish, so that you can go back out there when it is time. So I think honoring that seems quite apt at the moment.
I love that. That's such sage wisdom. And I love that you brought that in, because it just feels like it offers another level of permission, as I recently felt called to do that and have shifted some things, and it feels like, even though we're going into spring, and it's like, symbolic, of, okay, going within, rebirthing, rejuvenating, restoking, the energy, to birth whatever's wanting to come through next. And, to your point, I think that as these systems continue to show themselves in full transparency, of the unsustainable model in which, they've been created, of that go, 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 do, begins to reveal more and more of, the sort of the cause and effect of that energy field. It brings us back into that natural cycle of connecting with the seasons and connecting with our own, blueprint of the seasons that desire to be expressed. So thank you so much for all that you are and do and bring forth. You're just such a beacon of inspiration and light and beauty. And we just feel so grateful
Yes.
to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been beautiful chatting with you guys and being with everyone on the call too.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. You're such an inspiration, and feel so much love and gratitude. And thank you all so much for tuning in. Our YouTube is open to transparency. You can check out all of our shows there. And again, yeah, thank you so much for being with us today.